let's talk some defensive backs. We'll preview Tennessee's defensive backs heading into the spring. You have said many times, and I agree with you, Caleb, that Trevon Flowers last year was undervalued. Is that the term you would use? If so, why? And I think we're on the same page here.
Yes, Trevon Flowers was undervalued and underrated massively. And this had to do with the fact that oftentimes as a free safety, which he was, there are different, there's the physical safety, the strong safety, and then there's a free safety. They're much more responsible in coverage. And typically you want it to be where your free safety can be the ultimate playmaker because they have the good backing of cornerbacks on either side. Trey Flowers didn't have that luxury because there were no good cornerbacks on either side. So rather than try to provide that extra safety blanket and maybe, come up with a few big plays here and there, he actually had to cover for so many serious deficiencies at cornerback and at nickel. And that sacrificed what he was able to do to really help his draft stock. I think it's the reason he wasn't invited to the combine, honestly. And I think whoever signs him as an undrafted free agent is going to get a steal. And
you think he'll slide that far to undrafted free agent? I still think he could get picked in the 6th or 7th round.
I mean, not being invited to the combine was a little red flag.
Fair.
Yeah. Look, if you ask me, who am I drafting, Trevon Flowers or Jeremy Banks? Trevon Flowers. Not even thinking about it. And Banks got invited to the combine and was named to the all-combine team. But I would draft Trey Flowers over him every single time. And he was a very unselfish player this last year. So the question, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the question this year becomes, who can fill that void? Not just the void of understanding the nuances of playing safety, because the same issues are going to be there this year. The quarterback position is not going to be any better. And who can fill that void? Who has the maturity to do it? And who also has the willingness to make that sacrifice? And that's a big question.
Let's go second down. Do the Vols have the necessary parts in place? That's second down. You've got Christian Conyer, Ricky Gibson, Jack Luttrell, Jordan Matthews, John Slaughter, to mention a few. Are the guys, maybe not for this year, but are the guys on campus that will build eventually a strong secondary, are they on campus right now, Caleb?
I believe they are. I
didn't think you'd say that, actually.
I know. I'm going to be fair. I think they are. I think Josh Heupel recruited well in this year's secondary. I think that there are still other guys that you could see play a larger role. Wesley Walker started to see his reps increase a lot down the stretch of last year.
True.
And so
ready initially.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think there is definitely a lot of potential with this group. It's just not going to be this year. It's not. And I think you've talked about it. You can learn cornerback more easily than you can learn safety, right?
Yes, definitely.
And safety is the one position
where great natural athlete, I guess I should say. Yes,
right.
If you're a great natural athlete, I think you can. If you've got great hips and physical ability, I think it's much easier to learn a quarter.
Right. I mean, the only major playmaker I ever remember at safety for Tennessee as a freshman was Eric Berry, who was just the most special player I think I've ever seen. And outside of him, I can't remember a freshman who made a massive impact at safety for Tennessee. So yeah, I think that the bodies are there. The issue is there's nobody experienced enough to play that safety spot that Flowers left, and that's a concern.
So third down, I'm going to continue along those lines in the defensive backfield. Who is the most important newcomer for Tennessee? Who will have the biggest impact in year one? I've said before, I'm going to go Jordan Matthews. I've liked him from the get. Nobody has given me any reason not to like him. And I continue to think that was a surprising get for Tennessee that they don't get under maybe a previous coach or two or three. I just thought that was a really big pickup out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The LSU guys, usually if they want you, they get you. And Tennessee got that pull from there. I think he'll have a pretty big impact pretty early. What say you, Caleb?
I want to disagree with you, but I agree. I would have said maybe Gabe jeudy-lally, the BYU transfer, but I think he could be serviceable, but I don't see Gabe jeudy-lally as like a future lockdown corner. I see that with Jordan Matthews, and I'm going to admit this. I'm being a little biased to my love for Louisiana football. Covering recruiting services for a while, there's two things I've gathered. kids who come from Texas oftentimes get massively overrated in recruiting rankings, and kids who come from Louisiana get massively underrated. Louisiana still has great recruiting, but I almost feel like every recruit in Louisiana should have an extra star added to whatever their rating is, because I just think it seems like a lot of the services miss on how elite the talent is out of that state in Louisiana. And you can track the NFL to see that.
Go ahead and smash that like button. We greatly appreciate that. Before we get to fourth down, brought to you by our friends at Vassy Lawn and Garden. Man alive, it's worth the drive. Previewing Tennessee's secondary heading into spring camp. Vassy Lawn and Garden, man alive, it's worth the drive. Commercial mowers, industrial, all right there. The buying power in Cleveland, Tennessee is worth the drive from Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga, right there in Cleveland, Tennessee. Vassy Lawn and Garden, man alive, it's worth the drive. So if we ended this past season for fourth down, let me set this up properly, Caleb. If we ended this past season, pardon me, and you looked at one player that Tennessee could not do without in the secondary from 2022, who would it be? Who would it have been if it's Trey Flowers?
So not counting Trey Flowers because he's gone, right?
You can count him. Would he have been the guy that you would have said, that's the guy they couldn't do without to play as well as they played, which was questionable in 2022?
Yeah, that would have been my guy. I would have said without Trey Flowers, they would have been even worse than they were.
Okay, so let me ask you this as I remind people to smash that like button. Thank you, John, and subscribe if you haven't. Who will be that guy that fills in that blank when we're having this discussion in 11 or so months?
I mentioned him earlier. I'm going to take a leap of faith and say Wesley Walker. I think I saw enough from him down the stretch last year. I don't know if he's going to play nickel or corner. I mean, he can play nickel, corner, or safety. He can play any of those spots. And I think you're going to see him be very, very reliable to a certain degree. I think that you could say Jalen McCullough, who's still there at safety, but I think McCullough's more, you want him making plays, being physical up front, coming down with interceptions if possible. I don't know if he's the guy that can cover for deficiencies. I think Wesley Walker is going to be I'm expecting a huge boost from him this year.
I'm actually going to take McCullough because, he had the issue, but I would have taken Wesley Walker second. So it's funny that we're going down that line. I think we're expecting the safeties to take a step up to fill in for Flowers, but the corners are pretty good. Is that kind of what we're saying? Or at least pretty known, maybe not pretty good, but pretty known is their physical ability. And I'll say this, whether it's Matthews or Gibson, whoever is going to pop up and take a step athletically. We are still talking about guys that are developing in their late 18s or late teens and early 20s. So I think you're going to see one of those guys step up. I think it's Matthews, but you will have a guy step up in that regard. But I'll take Jalen McCullough. If we're having a conversation 11 months from now and we say that Jalen McCullough or Wesley Walker really stepped up and Tennessee didn't miss Trevon Flowers, then we're talking about a defense that was probably every bit as good and significantly better than last year. If one of those guys step up. Caleb, you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think they're going to have much of a drop-off at linebacker. I think there are some issues with edge rusher and defensive line because of a couple of losses. But I will say on the defensive line, you're not going to learn much about that in the spring. There are a couple of guys that still need to get into the program that are going to be summer enrollees. Shondavian Bradley's one of them. And I think Tyree Weathersby is the other one. And so until you get those guys in, you're not really going to see who's going to fill those voids left by Byron Young and Latrell Bumpus. So I think that's still going to be a question going into the summer. But I think we're going to find out pretty quickly that who steps in at linebacker. And Tennessee has a lot of options there, so they should be okay. So because that makes the chance that the defense is better.